Coaches Take on Work is a community of coaches sharing our perspectives on work today. Come for the spicy takes and stay for the quick tools and tips. Find everything from best practices in management and leadership to our thoughts on trending topics in work and some fun things you may not be expecting.
No, it should be fun. I love Block Island. It's kind of like a down-to-earth Martha's Vineyard, I'd say.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, like very chill. A lot of people on bikes. So it's an island. We don't bring cars.
Like, that's amazing. Just biking everywhere.
And people bring cars, unfortunately. So it's not just biking everywhere.
Just
it's
judge them.
Try not to get hit by a car everywhere, but you have to take a ferry.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love just the idea of biking. So enjoy.
So we had to prioritize the vacation, and we weren't originally doing it like that to Dutch. It's a good kickoff into today's conversation.
It is. Happens in life and work.
Yes. And we are talking about prioritization today. So it's sort of the perfect topic. And if you are like me and in July and realize you've not planned a summer vacation and it's the second week of July, time to prioritize that. And so we'll kind of talk about a framework to help you determine those priorities today. I'll do a brief introduction and then I'll let Jacqueline introduce herself. But hi, everybody. My name is Chelsea Side. I am the founder and chief coach and consultant at Talent Praxis, where we help companies and leaders turn their ideas into practices to achieve their goals. And today, obviously, we're talking about prioritization, which is one of my favorite topics, really because, at least for me personally, I like to be focused. I like to make progress. And I think the easiest way to do that is to intentionally know what your priorities are, know what your important and most valuable work is. So I think if you take the time to prioritize, you can more easily determine what you should be doing and make some basic decisions that could feel really hard without some work prioritizing. So excited to discuss. And Jacqueline, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah. I'm Jacqueline Cook. I'm the founder of Jacqueline Cook Coaching, where as a certified coach, I focus on leadership and productivity, which is why I'm very excited about this topic, and personal finance, and really use the power of coaching to help professionals have greater impact in and outside of work. And I agree with Chelsea. This is a really great topic. And I think it's a topic that's not honestly talked about in and of itself enough. We talk about like, what's the priorities, but this is like a whole system. And so I'm excited to dig into a specific framework because I think it helps people just have a tangible tool to actually think about how they're spending their time. Because I really believe most of us want to intentionally spend our time in things that have impact. And so this is one of those tools that help us really start to do that. So excited to dig in. And before I get on that soapbox of how excited I am, I'm going to actually ask Chelsea to break it down. So Chelsea, can you give us the basics? Like when I say intentional prioritization and when we frame this as something of a tool to be intentional with our time, what do we mean?
Yeah. So to define intentional prioritization, I'll actually start with the results. When I am working with a leader who I know intentionally prioritizes their focus time, their time in general, their work, their projects, they can quickly tell me what their priorities are at any given time. And those priorities are based in their most important and most valuable work. Those are the things that if they accomplish them, they're going to move the needle, not just this quarter, but in the next 3 to 5 years. And moving the needle amongst their team's productivity, moving the needle amongst their departmental level goals, moving the needle amongst their personal goals as well, right? All of these things kind of interrelate to an individual's ambitions too. So when you are intentionally prioritizing, you are really strategically thinking in advance about what is your most important work, what is your most valuable work. And we're going to be using the word work throughout this, but I do like that we kicked off to Jacqueline's idea with vacation, because it's not just, the work you do in your 9 to 5 or in the office. It's any way you're spending your time. So intentional prioritization occurs when you know your most important, most valuable use of your time or use of your work.
I'm glad you added that too, because I think it is relevant to consider time. And so it's not just your 9 to 5 time, it's actually all of your time. And so being intentional about that in general is going to be huge for people in and outside the office. So couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And I'd add, if you're that person who always says, when someone says, how are you doing? You respond with busy. I'm busy. I'm very busy. Number one, stop saying you're busy. And number two, think about intentional prioritization. Consider this podcast, because I think people who intentionally prioritize recognize it's not that they're busy, it's that they're focused on their priorities, which is pretty cool. But Jacqueline obviously is one of my favorite people to discuss this with, because she's one of the most organized, well prioritized people I know. And I know you're going to hate me giving you all these compliments in a row, but I'm going to do it. And I believe one of your favorite tools from this is the one we're covering today. So tell us a little bit more. What is the Eisenhower matrix?
Yeah, I'll step back a little academic, but Eisenhower matrix, as maybe would be assumed, is credited to President Eisenhower. So he would use this for high stake issues to really identify what to do and when to do them. But then more formally, it was used around the 80s with Franklin Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, as really a productivity tool, so that people can use this to actually be productive in how they spend their time, which we alluded to earlier as well. And so in a nutshell, as we've said it, it is a tool to help you focus your time effectively and prioritize your work, as Chelsea said, so you can do high impact work and get the results that you want. Yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. And the inspiration from President Eisenhower, but of course, formalized by Franklin Covey. If you've not read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, check that out as a takeaway from this. There are also TED Talks associated. They're awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us today.
Yeah. So that's, conceptually what it is, but let's walk through it a bit. Let's actually break it down. And it is an actual framework. And so we'll have that linked in the call notes as well, so people can see it. But Chelsea, go ahead. Why don't we just break it down for our listeners so they can understand what we're really talking about here?
Yeah. I'll start with its origin, and I'm paraphrasing this quote. It won't be exact, but I also don't think we have it exact anywhere. But President Eisenhower said something like, work can either be urgent or important. It is rarely both. And I share that because there in this framework are essentially 4 levels of prioritization. And level 1 is urgent and important, which is ironic because its origin was that is rare. And that should be the least amount of your time spent. So it is, of course, your P0. It's your number 1 priority, if you will, for your time is spent on both your urgent and important work, but it should be least frequent. So if you find the majority of your time is actually spent in this urgent and important category, that's a moment to check in and say why, what is creating and causing all of these fire drills, all of this urgency. The second category, priority 2, or like P1, if you measure in that way, would be your important work. So this is where the majority of your time should be spent, kind of what I was talking to earlier, because it's your most valuable time spent and your most valuable work, the work that really makes a difference in the long run. That third category will be your urgent but not important work. So this is work that has some sort of deadline or purpose for making it urgent, but it's not very impactful. Here, this is the work that you may find yourself delegating or time boxing or considering how you can prioritize after the first 2 categories. And the fourth, this will seem kind of obvious, but it's your neither important nor urgent work. This is work that you're either choosing not to do, or again, you're really time boxing it. You're doing it in a pretty specific way so that it takes up really the least amount of your time throughout the week. So 4 priority levels: urgent and important, urgent and not important, and neither urgent nor important.
I might just add there too. I know this isn't a podcast on delegation, but that's also really the last one. Both of the last 2 are opportunities for delegation, especially something that's not urgent and not important. There could be questions, which we'll get into, like, should anyone be doing this? But it really might be a great task for someone on your team to get the exposure where it's not high stakes, it's not urgent, it's not going to be time pressured. And so always having that tool in your back pocket as a manager or a leader is important as well. So
yeah. And that's a super great addition. And I think kind of leads into my question for you, which is those definitions really matter, right? And so what you're kind of sharing is like not urgent or not important for anyone, or not urgent and not important for you, the leader, could be urgent and important for other people on your team. So Jacqueline, how do we define these terms?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way of saying it, right? So what we're saying, and we'll just break that down, is we've used these words multiple times now, but define for yourself. So as the leader, define, what do we mean when we say, what do you mean when you say important? And I would beg to guess that some people actually have never really done this, honestly. So like really defined it. And we said kind of earlier, we alluded that it should be probably around the impact work that you're assigned to, the metrics you're tracking towards. And then also define, what's urgent mean? Is urgent any request that comes in and all of a sudden you just perceive everything as urgent? I think there is, especially in a remote world that we're living in, every ping feels urgent. And so really ask yourself, what does urgent mean to me? What does urgent mean to my team, to my boss, to the company? And that's going to be different across industries, across companies. And so that's why it's a personal thing you need to ask and answer. And then when we think about urgency too, is like, is it drawn by a deadline? Is it drawn because someone specifically asked? So that always feels urgent. Or is it just because we perceive it? And so answering urgent and important, answering what it means to say that it's urgent or that it's important, is the crux of then being able to actually utilize this tool. Because without doing that, you most likely will just be in the same spin you've been in. So you have to start there.
Definitely. I know Jacqueline said this, but just to reemphasize, it's very hard to do those definitions. It's very, very challenging. And I think they sound so simple in this framework. And we love, both of us, frameworks that are simple because you can memorize them and apply them more easily. We really start with like, am I applying it? Am I being thoughtful to applying it? Because it's as hard as she just made it out. So,
and that's why we even position this as intentional prioritization. This is not going to happen by accident or by default. And most likely, if you're listening, like, it isn't happening by default. And so it is about actually doing that part. And so I guess we're talking hypothetically, but like, what challenges, Chelsea, have you actually seen managers run into when either using the matrix or even maybe like wrestling with how to implement it? Because we're kind of saying it is hard. So what have you seen? What in your coaching is your experience with managers around this topic?
Yep. I would bucket them in two categories. One I alluded to earlier, which is this concept of busy, air quotes for anyone listening. And then two is this concept of urgency. And, you started to allude to it, but I'll give some more specifics. But first, let me start with busy. Busy is a hollow word and it just doesn't mean anything anymore. And if you disagree with me, please DM me. Like, I would love to discuss this with you. But I learned that busy is a hollow word and it doesn't mean anything anymore when my son was born. And I realized I had never yet really felt what it was like to be busy until I had a newborn. And even then, busy seemed weak. It seemed like an inability to explore internally and be honest with myself around how I'm feeling and where I am and what my day and week looks like. So I shared this earlier and I'm going to say it again. If you answer, how are you doing? If you always answer with the word busy, challenge number one, don't even practice Eisenhower. Just stop saying busy. Be more specific. Yes, maybe you're busy at a high level, but it's weak. Really, what are you? Right? And why? What led you there? So something I've been saying this month is I took on a pretty big project this month, and it's leading me with more one-on-one coaching calls than I would prefer. And so I'm noticing that like I'm kind of over capacity in terms of my one-on-one coaching calls and having more calls than I prefer in a given week, which is leading to a few other chain effects. And I can then step back and observe that and see a lot of my time is being spent in ways that I don't prefer it to be spent. I made that decision, right? And now I'm seeing the side effects of it, but I'm not saying busy. So people ask me how I am. I'm in the midst of a really big project right now. It's leading me to taking a lot of and putting a lot of effort into these one-on-one calls. So start there. If you're finding this framework challenging, I bet it's because you think you're too, air quotes, busy. And then the second piece of the problem with the word urgency, and Jacqueline alluded to this, but urgency has so many different meanings to different people. And rarely are we in a moment or a scenario where the deadline is super, super hard, right? Those moments do occur. So I would just start with, how hard is that deadline? And think about one of your most important clients, something you've promised them on a specific date, even if the date was contracted. but then you're still able to move the deadline somehow. You're still able to move the work somehow. So urgency feels like this really important thing, but the goalpost is often shifting. And so getting right with what are the true hard deadlines? Why are they the way they are? What's imposing them? And the other piece of urgency, and Jacqueline mentioned this as well, is when it tends to be a fire drill from more senior leadership, or a fire drill from the CEO, or a fire drill from your VIP client, or a fire drill from your board member or investor, right? Someone who holds authority and importance and power over the work that you're doing is imposing urgency, imposing a deadline. When those instances occur, push back and say, what are the assumptions that I'm making? Push back against yourself. And what are the facts? What are the cold, hard, objective facts of this scenario? And what am I assuming? And then explore those assumptions. I'm assuming they want it tomorrow because they said as soon as possible. Is that a fair assumption? I don't know, right? So those, I think, are the biggest challenges. You're busy, air quotes, and or urgency is a very hard word to explore. And so spend some time separating your facts from assumptions.
But I like that you just broke that down there too, because I think that's a good framework for people to use to define urgent is what am I assuming? And I think what people often assume, something like that, as soon as possible, is right now. And maybe absolutely sometimes is, but we should at least clarify or ask. Kind of goes back to the idea of making assumptions or expectations being set. So I think it's really great. So what is the facts and what am I assuming? And that in and of itself could really help then answer for many tasks what's urgent as well. I love that. And this is important for the whole team. You might think, so we're thinking about tasks coming on your plate, but I would just also want to put that framework of think about when you are delegating tasks, where you're assigning tasks to your team. Are you also saying things like as soon as possible? And do you actually think it'd be more valuable to be specific so that you actually are helping your team practice this idea of prioritization just as much as you're trying to practice it? And sometimes that's the best way of learning too. So
love that self-awareness. Start with you.
Always start with you.
Yeah, totally. And let's get into more specific examples. And I kind of alluded to this example, but I think it's the best place to start, especially in sort of this urgency cycle, the fire drills. So, and I'm sure, Jacqueline, this has happened to you in coaching. So I'm a team leader. I'm coming to you and I'm in that fire drill spiral. It's hard for me to get ahead of my days and weeks because I'm always being bombarded with these unplanned, unexpected fire drills. How do I start to apply this framework?
Yeah. And I know we joked about, but like truly step back and start with you and do exactly what we just said. So what is a fire drill? So we do hear this a lot, right? Or the busy. And so really naming what is contributing to the fire drill. I'll push on the start with you because did you just procrastinate? And now this is urgent and important. Let's be honest with ourselves. And people pretend like that was just me in college and I don't procrastinate anymore. That was me in school. But newsflash, like our habits don't change unless we do something intentionally to change them. And so you very may still be a procrastinator, and there's no shame in procrastination. And just be honest with ourselves of what contributes to fire drill. So I'm going to start with the check in with yourself. Did the procrastination contribute to the fire drill? Could you have done something different? Or the other side of the fire drill often is unexpected work, like Chelsea just said. But naming that and then determining from there, that assumption versus what is actually the facts can help at least alleviate some pressure sometimes with fire drills. The reason I call out the procrastination and what's causing a fire drill is because maybe you can't change this moment, but that might very well be something you could change for the future. So this is something that takes practice and takes work. And so with a team lead or a manager coming to me with something like that, I would say, okay, let's look at what's contributing overall to the fire drills over the last month and what has been unexpected, what has been procrastinated, and what can we do differently so that we are therefore moving to the second category as planning for the important work. And so that's the other thing I'd start to say is really define what's important to your work, which we said earlier, right? What are your priorities? What are the goals you're setting? And be honest with even just, we like talking like a calendar audit. Like how often are you spending time on those? Are you squeezing it in between meetings? Are you squeezing it in between when something's not urgent? And so almost taking care of that first, which is what we refer to when we say plan accordingly, and actually schedule that in. Really be honest about where that would fit and schedule that in. And then what I said earlier, but delegate. There's going to be things on your plate that you're doing that you don't need to be doing, that aren't high impact work for you, but could be really valuable for someone else, or nobody should be doing. But either way, looking at delegating it to your team, to others, changing deadlines that are not hard deadlines can also be a way to start to create more of a flow and have more control of your time. those are hard things, but you have to stop the cycle. And that might take some hard work to start.
Well, that stop the cycle. The one piece I'd add that I also like considering with a fire drill, and it's not going to be relevant for everyone, but thinking about needs anticipation, and maybe it's needs of an individual leader who's kind of pushing a lot of fire drills on you. Maybe it's needs of your team, maybe it's needs of the organization. And this may mean stopping and doing more strategic, more brainstorming, more sort of blue sky work. Just like, why are these fire drills occurring? So it's really not any of the things Jacqueline shared. You're not anticipating the needs of a certain department, the needs of a certain customer, the needs of a certain senior leader. Well, if they're constantly bringing you things with a sense of urgency, right? And so how can you prepare for those in the future? How can you allocate time to expected fire drills if they're really going to occur? And that's a tough thing to realize, because you may think of yourself as someone who anticipates needs very well, but if you're in a cycle of fire drills, I'm going to tell you, you don't. So take a hard look in the mirror.
That's a great point as well. So that's with fire drills. Let's switch gears. Let's think of it more, maybe a VP in back-to-back meetings. They aren't busy, but they're in back-to-back meetings. We get that one a lot. Just, I have nothing but time. I'm only in meetings. And so they never have time for strategic work. What do you say to them? How do we work with them?
Yep. My first favorite, I know this is so simple, but I think it's just helpful, is to audit your meetings. If you are truly in those back-to-back meetings, you can delegate meetings. You can delegate who attends meetings. So start by pausing, backing up, auditing your meetings. And in your meeting audit, what is the purpose or what is the goal of the meeting? One thing I find that leaders start to observe is certain meetings are there for strategic opportunity, are there for future planning. And so, yes, you are in back-to-back meetings and your time is primarily spent in meetings, but what is the purpose of those meetings? What is the goal of them? Because you don't just want to say like, oh, I can't do anything because I'm just in meetings. If you're not getting anything done in those meetings, what are you doing, right? And so pause, reflect, really think about what the meetings are. Your one-on-ones with your team members should be time for strategic work. This is your time for strategically understanding and learning about your organization at more of a ground level, learning about what's going on in the eyes of your team members, opportunities in their eyes. This is your time for strategic retention. This is your time for strategic engagement and motivation for your team members. So if you're in back-to-back meetings, you have opportunities to use those meetings strategically, but start by auditing them and understanding what you're meeting around. And then the second category I would give, having time for strategic work, I often share means time without deadlines. And so if someone's like, okay, I'm going to plan out my strategic priorities based on their deadlines, I don't think they should have deadlines. These should be kind of your blue sky work. This should be thinking about the future, thinking about what would be even better if we could focus on this. And so it may lead to conversations with zero output, right? Which can be really stressful to think about. But maybe that's what it is. It's just a true blue brainstorm, thinking about what you could get done in 2, 3, 5 years. And maybe it leads to nothing in that one conversation. So strategic work tends to be less output driven and less deadline driven. And you may already have opportunity for it in the meetings in front of you. And if you truly are in meetings you shouldn't be in, delegate them, stop attending, have those tough conversations you've been avoiding. It is way easier to show up to what's on your calendar than it is to push back. And so start by just taking that time to push back. If you are really in the conversations you should be in, what of those conversations are strategic already or could be if you just refocus the agenda, conversations, questions. And then lastly, strategic work should not be deadline driven, in my opinion. And it should also not necessarily be results driven. This is more of the creativity, the innovation, the early stages. So it can be fun, can be explorative.
Yeah, I love that. You're actually giving a shout out to meetings, right? Their meetings are not always supposed to be a dirty word. Like they're actually supposed to be valuable time spent together. I'll add one more that maybe is a little tactical when I think of calendaring, but if you do have work that deems focus attention, let's say like that, schedule it. If you are a leader whose day revolves around your calendar and meetings, then just as much, I know this is not exactly the same as this framework, but like schedule it in because it's important and it's rare that people are going to schedule over a meeting you already have, right? It's a meeting with yourself to have focus time. And so I'm a big advocate for blocking time on our calendars as well. And that is time for you, especially if you're a procrastinator, to say, like, I'm sitting down and focusing on getting that memo out or whatever it is at this time, and actually treat it like a meeting with yourself, just as much as respecting anyone else's time that you show up for their meetings as well. So that could be a trick for people.
Yep. I love that. Definitely. And also, even getting an email out, getting a memo out to your team requires time. So if you are truly 9 to 5 back to back, if both of us have been this and are this some days, guess what? You're not doing anything else that day. And if you're like, oh, I'm also going to get out that super important email that day. No, you're not. Unless you plan on working later, which everyone has their different priorities for their work hours. But that is smart to think about when you're looking at your day. If you are truly 100% back to back with a barely even 15 to 30-minute break for lunch, you're not doing anything else but attending those meetings. So you're not getting that important email out unless you block it on your calendar. That's a really good point. So we have the framework, we have some examples. Jacqueline, tell us how can we measure results of this? We've talked about how hard it is. How can you know if this is effective?
Yeah, I know we're trying to be honest, but it is actually, the power of this is because it can be so powerful when you actually are implementing this. And even just starting can start to have results. And so I'd leave with 2 questions on how to measure results. It is simply, are you getting high impact work done? Therefore, the important work done? Yes, no. If the answer is no, then revisit your approach. If the answer is yes, you're on the right track. And then more internally, do you feel in control of your time? We're assuming, we're making some assumptions here that we're talking about prioritization for the intent that you feel more effective, so you feel like you're in control, so you feel more like you're even contributing to high impact work. That is our underlying assumption with this whole framework. But check yourself, like, do I feel more in control of my time? Do I feel like I'm caught up? Those kind of things that maybe it's a scale, like a sliding scale on this, like you feel more than you did yesterday or more than last week, but that is that you're moving in the right direction. This will not change overnight. It did not get created overnight, but you can measure these results to see progress with impact and how in control you're feeling with your time.
Love that. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
And I'll give a quick final takeaway, then Jacqueline be thinking, because I want you to give one as well. But as I've been thinking about everything we shared, I think I'm actually going to call back to the very first thing that I said in this. My biggest takeaway that I hope anyone has from this is, if I were to ask you right now, what is your most important and valuable work? Could you list the top 3 to 5 things? And then I'll go past that. What is the most important and valuable use of your time? So not just work. Could you list the top 3 to 5 things? And if you can't, start there. What are your values? What's most important to you? And then both in general and in work, what's the most important and valuable spend of your time? And so my biggest takeaway that I'd ask for anyone listening to this is focus on the most important. Back to Eisenhower, work is either urgent or important. It's rarely both. And if you don't know what your most important work is, you're spending your time doing your most urgent work pretty exclusively. So, what about you, Jacqueline? Biggest takeaway?
Reminder. I guess I'm gonna go back to what I just said. Just start small. Like, truly, you don't have, this is eat the elephant, like one thing at a time. Start with a day. I mean, even how Chelsea referred to a day of meetings, like you can start this one day at a time as well if you need to just start small. And put the framework in front of you. Ask yourself these couple of questions we've named and just start to see how it changes the way you work. And what I've really found, this is not a takeaway, I guess it's more of just a reflection, but it's a ripple effect. So when you start to do this, your team starts to notice and people are curious. Nobody is excited to be the person that's running around who's always busy. But the person who's intentionally spending their time and feels like they're contributing is an inspiration. And so this could be a ripple effect for others too. So if that motivates you, I'll just name it that way. This is not a just for you thing. If you're externally motivated as well, this could actually impact others too.
I love that. What's so fun about those is they're different, ground up versus top down. So if you're like a big picture thinker first, go with my takeaway. If you're a day-to-day person first, go with Jacqueline's. And if one of ours don't work, switch to the other one. Right. One will help you get started. That's so awesome. Very complimentary.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining today. I hope you all leave thinking about priorities more intentionally.
Join us next time for Coach's Take on Work.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to Coaches Take on Work through your favorite streaming service so you don't miss a future episode. We are Coaches Take on Work. And for this episode's hot take, I'd add, if you're that person who always says when someone says, "How are you doing?" you respond with busy. I'm busy. I'm very busy. Number one, stop saying you're busy. And number two, think about intentional prioritization. Consider this podcast.